Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome everybody to the monthly Conexxus webinar series. Today, backed by popular demand, we're very happy to have Joe Basirico with us. He is the Senior Vice President of Engineering at Security Innovation. And today he's going to talk about one of the things that his company does to help phish-proof your staff and your software systems. And one of the things that they do at Security Innovation is to provide training on such things as this. So we brought in a subject matter expert and also a great Conexxus member. Our agenda today, I'll go through a couple of housekeeping items and go through the who's all on the call and presenting today, a little bit about Conexxus and what Conexxus does. Then we'll go through the presentation, and then at the end we'll have Q&A, questions and answers. Just want to remind everybody that the webinar is being recorded. It will be made available in approximately 15 days. You can find it one of two ways. You can go to YouTube and go to Conexxus Online, or you can even subscribe to Conexxus Online in YouTube so that you can get notices of all of the new webinars that are published. You can also go to Conexxus.org. If you go under the Resources tab, you'll see the webinars, and that links you to YouTube. We will be providing a survey link upon the conclusion of this webinar. It'll be an email. And there's only just a couple questions. One of them is we'd like your feedback on the future webinars that you'd like to see and hear. And then once you complete the survey, you will then receive a link to the presentation. We do ask that you ask the questions using the GoToWebinar panel, and there's a little question section there, and type your questions. We do ask that you do not ask any vendor-specific questions. And everybody, again, is in listen-only mode. So if you do have any feedback for Conexxus, please send it to info@conexxus.org. Our Conexxus host today is Miss Allie Russell. And so, Allie, thank you for all the logistics, putting this together, keeping everybody on track. I'm your moderator. My name is Kara Gunderson. I'm the point-of-sale manager at Citgo Petroleum by day, and I'm a volunteer. And I also chair the Data Security Committee for Conexxus. Another volunteer is Joe Basirico, our presenter from Security Innovation. Conexxus is a nonprofit, independent member-driven technology organization. Really what they do is they are setting standards for the U.S. petroleum industry. And that really helps all of us, especially from a merchant perspective and from a POS vendor perspective, because if we're all adhering to the standards, then there's essentially one set of data rules for people to follow, and it makes the integration for all of us less time consuming, it costs less, and so we all appreciate what Conexxus does. Conexxus does only have a handful of staff members, and so really it's driven by mostly volunteers, Joe and myself, and many, many others, and there are many committees. So the other thing that they do is they provide a vision for emerging technology, for trends, and they're really an advocate for our industry. We kind of call them the technology arm of NACS. Again, they work very, very closely together. We've had some great webinars, and again, you can go to nacs.org under resources to find some of the previous webinars, but we've got some great ones coming up too. A couple weeks ago, we just had Dennis from Synopsys give us Application Security 101. Of course, today, Joe is giving us the phish-proofing your staff and IT systems. We've got the Omega folks giving us an updated data science presentation, an update from what they did about 18 months ago. The folks at Hughes are going to talk to us about Easy PCI and how to make that easier. We've got Verifone and one of Conexxus's own talking about outdoor EMV and the need for it and how to get there. And then Sam from Control Scan is working on his content for the December webinar. So again, if you fill out the survey, we do ask for your feedback, and we do take your feedback seriously. So if there's something you'd like to see, please note that. Just a quick reminder that Conexxus, in partnership with NACS, provides the Tech Edge series, a part of the educational series at NACS. And of course, that's coming up here hard to believe it's only about a month away in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you haven't registered, please do so. And I'm hearing that hotel rooms are quickly filling up. So if you haven't made plans to attend, please do so as soon as possible. Next is an industry event, as we all know, and Conexxus will be at booth 3755. So now I'd like to turn this over to Joe. And Joe, thanks again for coming back. You always give us some great information in sharing the knowledge of you and what your company does. And so today is no different. So thanks for helping us all fish-proof our staff and software systems. Joe.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cara. So yeah, like Cara said, my name is Joe Baserico. I'm SVP of Engineering at Security Innovation. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you today is about phishing. And the reason why this continues to be such a big deal is, it's really just a numbers game. So we have a lot of controls in place, but one of the things that we've discovered over the years is that, phishing really is not solved, and it's really important to kind of pay attention and make sure that we're not taking our eye off that ball. And so in this talk, over the next half an hour, 45 minutes, hopefully I'll give you some perspective on the history and evolution of phishing attacks. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you can do to help your staff identify and respond to phishing attacks. And then obviously software and system hardening techniques that you can follow. And then at the end, we'll also talk about policies and incident response. So as policymakers or as decision makers, what you can do to make sure that you're shoring up your phishing prevention as much as possible. And again, this is one of those things that we've been talking about for a long time, but it's really important to keep your eye on the attacks that are really still in use and really effective for the attackers. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of phishing attacks. Phishing, like I said, it's an oldie but a goodie. Email is an attack vector in 96% of the incidents with social action. So that means that if it comes in through email or other communication platforms, email is that attack vector in most of those. One of the things that makes this so effective is that we tend to share a lot of information on the internet, right? So we're sharing our name, our address, our location, where we like to eat, where we like to bank and shop. All of that is being kind of sent up into the cloud and it's available on the internet. So especially this makes phishing easy in the case of spear phishing, where you're a targeted attack, or whaling if you're a high-level CEO or something like that. And so those phishing attacks can become very, very focused. And so knowing what information is available to attackers is a great first step. Now, education is one of the things that we push and is really, really important. But again, this is a numbers game. So this is kind of an unrealistic panacea. So you imagine an attacker has the opportunity to send out millions of emails. If even 1 or 2% of people click on those links, that's an effective campaign for them. Now, what we found is, based on the Verizon 2018 Data Breach Investigations report, that it's up to 4% of the people are falling for any given phish. Now, the reason why this is so effective, again, is just the numbers game. And I can send out all these emails, and if a handful of people click, that's effective. Certainly, we do recommend using system-level security like antivirus, anti-malware. Certainly, that is really an important component, but we really want defense in depth here. So education plus antivirus is good, but obviously we always need to keep this on the top of our minds. And then email technology is good at detecting malware. So if I send you a virus or a worm or something like that directly through email, it does a decent job of detecting that is malicious and flagging it as such. But if I send you an email with a link in it that's a little bit more difficult for the email technology to really detect and protect against. Now, I want to go through some of the tactics that folks are using now, and I think that by understanding the mind of an attacker, you can better understand kind of the ways that they're going to attack you and their thinking, so you can be better protected. There are a lot of different types, and we end up calling them all these kind of silly names like spear phishing and farming and smishing and spy phishing and vishing and whaling. But these are all just different terms for effectively the same thing. That's sending a malicious message to get some user to take some action, like click on a link or install something. They use a number of different tricks and tactics in order to get you to click on that link. Certainly, we're all pretty familiar with things like typo or cyber squatting. You notice like Facebook here without facebook.com with just one O, or google.com or Yahoo. And these are, the reason why these are so effective is, at least if you're like me, you kind of scan the link and you say, oh, that seems right. And then you've also been trained to look at like a TLS certificate. And if an attacker is really clever, they'll actually register this Facebook.com, register a TLS certificate, so you end up trusting it even more. But that typo could be really an effective avenue of attack. Another way that you can kind of get kind of a sneaky attack is the use of subdomains. So subdomains are anything before the main domain. So here, user.com would be the attacker-controlled domain, and then www.xyzbank would be kind of what you're looking for. So you could imagine that in this form, you might have www.citibank.com.evilhacker.com. Now, you as a normal user might look at that URL and say, oh, well, it starts with www.citibank.com. That sounds great. But all of that is controlled by evilhacker.com. So that subdomain is in full control of the attacker. So it's really important to understand how domains work, which, one of the things that is always kind of upsetting to me as someone who's been in the security industry for 16 or 17 years now, is how much of the requirement we put on our end users, right? Is it reasonable for my folks, like my mom and dad, to understand how domains are processed and parsed? I don't think it is, but that's where we're at right now. Now, we also have like hidden or misspelled URLs, different things like that. IDN homograph attacks. These are things where you replace the O in Facebook with a 0, or there are actually some Unicode characters that are very, very, very similar and really difficult to parse out. And this is the same kind of thing. One of my favorites is something called bit squatting. And I just think this is really interesting because we all talk about solar flares and gamma radiation in the movies, but what we found is this is actually an effective attack. So if you think about it, everything on your computer is ones and zeros. And when you go to google.com, there's an opportunity for each one of those bits to accidentally get flipped. And there's a reasonable chance that one of those bits gets flipped, and I can register the resulting flipped bit as a domain. So it may not even look like google.com. It might look like something else. But I've registered that, and your computer has a solar flare hit it at the right time. It gets flipped. Instead of going to Google, you come to my URL, and that's kind of the ultimate of website forgery tricks. There are a lot of other tactics around phishing where you have fraudulent messages that pop up. You've probably seen these where they say, oh, your computer's infected with the latest virus. We need to download this, this antivirus tool that'll cost you $25.95 per month or whatever. And then there's also a lot of opportunity for hackers to inject their own code into legitimate websites through stored Crosssite scripting or other attacks. And so, you know, these look legit, but then as soon as you click through, you go to a malicious site and you're infected. So without further ado, I wanted to give you guys a little pop quiz here. So just to underscore how difficult this is, I pulled these from the internet, and one of these is a real request from Facebook, and the other is a fake one from not from Facebook, from an attacker. And what we see here, what makes this so interesting is that they've clearly exactly copied the HTML, the email that Facebook sends. They're spoofing the the email sender. So we have something like Facebook notification plus QKTOX4C9@facebookmail.com. You have the same kind of similar thing on the right there. You have both of these look very similar, very accurate, the same colors, the same message at the bottom. And if you look very, very carefully, you'll see on the left that you have 177 friends and 2 photos. And that's really the only indication that you might have that this is a fake link. It should be photos, right? A common typo or something like that. Now, Facebook wouldn't make that mistake, but an attacker might. They maybe edited this a little bit and they thought nobody would notice. Now, the links might take you to somewhere nefarious, and you might have to click through and see and just verify all that URL and things like that. But this can be very, very difficult. Here's another example. Again, almost identical pages. But in this case, what I'm looking for is in the URL bar. So you notice on the left, we have PayPal incorporated as the TLS certificate. On the right, we do have a TLS certificate, but it doesn't say PayPal. Now, this is a little bit easier because they're side by side, but you can imagine if these weren't side by side and all you were presented with was the one on the right, things could be a little bit more difficult. Now, I've cropped this kind of a little more difficult to see, but this is one of those subdomain attacks that I was mentioning. So you can notice on the right side, it says www.paypal.com, and then there's a dash there. And so after that, there's something.evilhacker.com. And evilhacker.com has registered their own TLS certificate, and they've gotten that certificate, and now they're presenting it as a PayPal. So that's how you can tell that is a fake URL, and you shouldn't type your email in there. There's a lot of really interesting tactics, and at Security Innovation, one of the things that we do is we have this like gamified hacker platform that I think is really great at teaching people hacker techniques. But one of the things that's led me toward is all of this knowledge about how gamification and emotion can play into getting people to do some activity that you want them to do. Now, for us, it's all about gamifying and getting them excited about learning about security stuff. But you can use those same techniques for nefarious reasons. So you can send someone a notification to their email that says, hey, we've transferred $500 from your account. You have to click through this link in order to verify it. Or if you didn't do this, you need to click through this right away. Now that gives the sense that there's some sort of terrible thing that's happened and that they need to go investigate. This is a really scary thing because if you bank with 3 or 4 banks and kind of similarly named, U.S. Bank and Bank of America and all this kind of stuff, and you see this email come through, you might get a little scared and click through the link before you even realize that this was a phishing attack. There's stealth attacks that essentially, instead of sending you the phishing link directly, will send you the essentially a page that will load the phishing attack afterward. And then this can kind of help bypass some of the firewalls and web application firewalls and different phishing detection systems that are out there. Social media scammers, of course, that actually pay for advertising. And then there are, some big company scams and things like that. And we've seen some pretty interesting numbers where, some company like Apple that has a lot of buzz around it, they release the latest iPhone or the latest AirPods or whatever they're going to release, and bam, that day, there's thousands of fake websites all trying to, emulate what Apple is doing and kind of get in on that, so that they can click through the wrong thing. Oh, you want the latest iPad? Here you go. You can buy it through this nefarious site. There's also a lot of mobile phishing attacks. Now, the funny thing is that as I was putting these slides together, I had a placeholder here, and 2 days ago I got the phishing attack on the left, which you could call a phishing attack. It could, maybe it's just spam. And then today I got this UPS phishing attack, which is great, right? So the thing that I noticed here is I didn't ask for anything to be sent to me from UPS. So I'm sure that if I click through that link, it would take me to somewhere kind of bad. But the idea around mobile phishing attacks or smishing attacks is that they're doing the same sorts of techniques, right? The only difference is the communication protocol or platform that they're using. So they are hiding behind the more basic platform of SMS instead of using something that's a little bit more powerful and has more checks built in. Browsers and TLS and web servers a lot of times have a lot more protection involved, and SMS is just text messages. So with this slide, I really wanted to talk about kind of the anatomy of a phishing attack. Now, as a phisher, I send out millions of emails. I'm sending out all these emails, and a lot of times people will think that as long as I don't click on the link, they're safe. And to a certain extent, that's true. Certainly after you click on things, that's when things go really bad. But even if you just open the email, that verifies that your email is an active email address. And the reason why this is so important is that the phishing attacker uses these enormous email lists of again, thousands and thousands of emails or millions of email addresses. And they want to know whether or not that's a valid email address. And as soon as you open that email, it loads remote images from their server. And once that image is loaded, they realize they can connect the dots, and they can realize that that is a verified email address. That increases the value of that email. Once you click on a link, again, that's when things get really bad. So the first thing that might happen is you might get sent to a fake site that is there in order to steal your credentials. Now, this fake site is going to be pixel perfect. It's going to look exactly like the site that you thought you were clicking through. And what it might do is it might just look like, please log in. You type in your credentials, Joe and password, and then you click on log in, and it redirects you. And this is what I think is just very clever. It redirects you to the login page where of the real site, where the login page of the real site says something like, your credentials are incorrect. So as a user, you think, oh, well, I just mistyped my password. And you type in your password, and you'll log in, and everything looks fine. But what has happened is you typed in your username and password correctly, and that's been stolen, and now you're redirected to the real site. Same thing could happen around identity theft or contact theft. So once you're on that fake site, kind of your whole experience is pretty controlled. Once you load a malicious website into your browser, there's a potential for malware to be planted or a web application attack to occur. And we'll talk about cross-site forgery and different cross-site scripting and JavaScript scanning in a bit, but one of the top ones is this cross-site request forgery. And this is where an attacker can force you to take some action on their behalf, fully authenticated. And so we'll talk about how that works in a minute, but and some things that you can do to fix it. But that's the idea. Now, for you guys specifically, it's important to remember that phishing is often a foot in the door attack that will lead to further attacks. So in this way, don't just think about a single person being attacked, but also think about what they have access to. And so you think about maybe somebody at the convenience store or a front office or something like that. Start training everyone and make sure that they all are aware of phishing attacks and different things like that. Because a lot of times what we've seen is that back office PCs or convenience stores or whatever are on the same internet connection as the point of sale systems or different things like that. And so this is all connected. And if I can get a foothold on one machine and that's on the same network as another higher profile computer, then things get a lot worse. So if you manage a group of stores, think about that. Think about that whole network as well. So let's talk about some things that you can do to kind of harden your staff and software systems against phishing attacks. One of the first things to think about is defense in depth. So for an attack to be successful, it has to complete these 3 steps. The email has to make its way through the gateway, so it can't be detected by any spam or phishing filters. It has to make it to the user's inbox. The user has to actually click on the link or execute the payload. And then that payload must then finally successfully communicate with the external command and control server. So those 3 things have to happen for this to be successful. If we stop the attack at any one of those steps, we can kill the attack. So during each of these, you can think about how to thwart things. So obviously keeping your spam and phishing filters up to date, things like that. You can inform your staff that they are serving as a human firewall. I think that people think that's kind of cool. Then they can reduce their attack surface by keeping their systems up to date, making sure that their antivirus is up to date, and those kinds of things. We'll talk about this more and more, but if you're going to make phishing really easy for the attacker, here are 3 ways you could do it. First off, use bad software. Right? So vulnerable use a lot of bad software. The more software that you use and the less patched it is, the poorer design it has, the more likely it will have vulnerabilities that the phisher can use against you. So you want to make phishing easy, use bad software. If you want to make phishing easier, stop patching. Stop patching altogether. This is a landscape that is constantly evolving, and new things are emerging all the time. And so this is a constant cat and mouse game, back and forth of defenses being built up, and then attackers breaking through those defenses and patches coming out. So again, if you want to make phishing easier, don't patch your systems. And then, of course, if you want to make phishing easier, just assume that your staff will make good choices. I'm sure that they know what to do. I'm sure that they've heard about it all and they won't click on things. And if you assume that, then sooner or later somebody will make a bad choice. So attack techniques are really quickly evolving and changing, and making sure that folks get training every year or frequently, and making sure that they're up to date with their own knowledge is also important. So I always think about like, patching the human user kind of thing. I mentioned earlier that we talk about cross-site request forgery. So cross-site request forgery is a vulnerability where an attacker is able to force a victim to make some action on their behalf. And this works because when you log into a website, you provide a username and password, and if those are correct, as a normal user, if those are correct, the website gives you a session token, and usually that session token is stored in a cookie. Now, the browser knows that this cookie came from this website, and for every other request, every time you go back to that website, it's going to automatically and transparently send those cookies with your request. Now, the website that you've logged into verifies that authentication cookie or that session cookie is valid still and hasn't expired and hasn't been tampered with, things like that. But this is great because it means that without a session token or a session cookie, you would literally have to log in or send your username and password every single time. And nobody wants to do that. So the session tokens are very, very good. Now, what this also means is that if an attacker can find a page that will take some action that only takes one request to happen, then they can leverage the fact that you're already logged in to force you to make that action. And here's an example. So imagine you're an attacker and you bank with this certain bank. You notice that this bank allows you to transfer funds from one account to another with one request. So I create this one request that says transfer $500 from my account to an attacker's account. And I make that request. Once that request gets sent to the server is clever, and it says, okay, well, I want to make sure that you are logged in so I can figure out what my account means. I want to make sure that you're logged in, and it checks your session token. Your session token is fine, and then that action is taken. So if I can give a victim, as an attacker, if I can give a victim that URL, and if I can force you to click that URL, then that whole action occurs on your computer, on your behalf, and then you send that request up to the website. The website checks your token. You're still logged in. It makes validates the request and transfers the funds, and the funds go back to the perpetrator. So this kind of thing is a very, very common attack for phishing because it's a single request. So all I need to do is get you to click on one single link, and this can happen. Now, as from your perspective, you can certainly fix these things, right? So you, from a web developer's perspective, you can fix these things by fixing cross-site request forgery. The best way to do this is to enable anti-cross-site request forgery tokens or controls. Now, when we do this, we're putting an unguessable token on the page. And this means that the web server checks two things. First, it checks the session token, just like it was before, but now it also checks the anti-cross-site request forgery token to make sure that the user started this request. And that's kind of the main control. Now, you can certainly force people to log in again to make sure that they are who they say they are. You can add "Are you sure?" confirmation pages. You can add multi-factor authentication out of band. You can have multiple levels of authorization. So you can have, states where, maybe you can read, but then if you go and try to transfer something, or you try to change your password or something like that, you request your credentials again. Or you can decide that, if there's no state where you can make an action with just one request, right? So that could be something else. Another thing that attackers like to use is open redirects or unvalidated redirects. This usually happens when I, as a web developer, want to land you on a page after you authenticate. I want to land you on a certain page. And so you can imagine that maybe there are 5 pages that I'm, that my website has. It's got my account, it's got a forum, and it's got a transfer page. And I want you to be able to click a link and then you land right on the forum page instead of the my account page, which is the default. And so I create a redirect. So it says, mydomain.com/login, and then login says like # redirect equals accounts.php or whatever it is. And so then I go there, I click on that link, I log in, and I type in my username and password, and then after that's authenticated, I get redirected to that other page. Now, an open redirect means that I can redirect someone to any other site, any other page on the internet. The reason why this is so bad is that I can then leverage your valid domain, your valid website, to send people to my evil website. So I can figure out that you have this open redirect, and instead of saying accounts.php, I can say evilhacker.org/accounts.php or relogin.php or whatever. And when you click that link, you look at that as the user. You look at that. The URL looks perfect. The domain looks perfect. The TLS certificate looks perfect. Everything is perfect because it's truly legit. Except after you log in, you're redirected to my evil site. And my evil site says, oh, sorry, you mistyped your credentials. Please type in again. Or, okay, you're logged in, and please type in your account number for verification or something like that. Right? So this open redirect can be a pretty nefarious attack as well. And so, if you have things like Office 365 or other cloud-based business applications, this can be super bad because imagine what someone can do with somebody else's login credentials or Outlook credentials, like a CFO or something like that. Now, as a software builder, you can certainly mitigate these things. You want to review your code for any uses of a redirect or a forward. Make sure that you are only allowing your redirects to occur within your own website. So don't allow redirects to happen outside of your website. And then just be really careful with all your input and destination parameters and things like that. I also want to talk about cross-site scripting. The reason why I think that cross-site scripting is so important here is that, as I mentioned earlier, Security Innovation does a lot of penetration testing. It's a huge source of business for us. And almost all of the applications we test have cross-site scripting in them still. And this is a vulnerability that I've been finding in applications my entire career. Luckily, people generally understand that cross-site scripting is a vulnerability that is worth fixing. I remember when I started out in the industry, having to convince some of our customers that they really did have to fix cross-site scripting. So I'm happy that people now understand that this is a vulnerability, but I am a little disappointed that it still is occurring. Now here on the left is a screenshot of translate.google.com, Google Translate having a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Now, clearly this is, kind of an egregious error, but again, most websites have this vulnerability. It has to be usually it's carried out on a trusted website, so that means that I find the vulnerability on a site that you already know and trust, and then I, as an attacker, can inject my own code as HTML or JavaScript or other browser script. I inject that onto the page, and sometimes it's reflected, and sometimes it's stored, and sometimes it's sent directly to the client. But the impact is that I can execute JavaScript right on the page, however, and do whatever I want. So that means that I can access anything else on the page. I can rewrite the page, or I might be able to redirect you. And a lot of times I can even, there's a great attack framework called Thief, the browser exploit implementation framework. And what this allows you to do is load a huge JavaScript framework that allows the attacker, as a demonstration, obviously, allows an attacker to scan internal networks or load up different websites, steal credentials, steal key presses and mouse clicks and things like that. So it's pretty significant. Now, when you mitigate cross-site scripting, the biggest thing is to whitelist or allow list any input that's coming to you, and then make sure that you're encoding anything on the way out. So make sure that you're doing input validation and output encoding. And when I say output encoding, I mean that you should do output encoding for context. And what I mean by that is that if you, imagine you have some data that came from a user, and you're going to put that data right onto a web page. Now, that's going to be great, and you want to HTML encode that. Now, if you take that same data, but that data is now going into a JavaScript block, then you need to JavaScript encode it. If it's going into XML or JSON, you need to XML or JSON encode it. So you need to really encode things per context. Now, finally, next I want to talk about cybersecurity fundamentals. The big thing here is that you need to be regularly updating your security definitions, keep your security products current, spam filters, antivirus, firewalls, keep them up to date. As I mentioned earlier, this is a cat and mouse game, so you need to kind of keep things moving and keep things up to date. Ensure your laptops and other removable devices require your security solution to include anti-spyware, anti-malware, client-side firewalls, and things like that. Those will all help. Another thing you can do is to just separate user and admin accounts. So make sure that users aren't just running as an admin all the time. You think about that. Think about all the things that an administrator has access to, elevated access to, and think about what would happen if those credentials were stolen. And so certainly really important. I wanted to talk just for a second about ransomware because in the last 6 months, I've had just as many friends and families and colleagues call me up and ask about ransomware, maybe because they've been infected by ransomware, or maybe they've heard about it in the news, or they're being affected about it in other ways. When Baltimore got hit by ransomware, he couldn't pay his water bill for, I think, 3 months. And so, UK's national healthcare system got hit by ransomware for a long time. Newark, Atlanta, Sarasota. It's a pretty significant attack. What it does is it just encrypts individual files, right? So it takes all of your personal files and encrypts them individually and then deletes the original. It sends that encryption key off to the main server and then says, well, if you ever want to see your files again, you have to pay this many Bitcoin to this account. The crazy thing is that it usually works. So usually if you pay the payment, they'll actually send you a key and it'll actually decrypt things. I wouldn't recommend that, but they do have pretty good technical support, I guess, with these ransomware attacks. Sometimes you can decrypt. You can actually look around. There's a couple of ransomware decryptors that work off of. The attackers made some mistake in the ransomware, and you can decrypt it. But a lot of times, those files are irrecoverable. So this is my pitch for just general security practices that you should follow, like offsite backups, anti-malware, and updates. But again, ransomware is one of those things that a lot of attackers will put onto a system after a phishing attack. System hardening tips, certainly minimize your attack surface by removing any unnecessary software, disabling unnecessary services, closing unused ports, general reduction of attack surface tips. are really good. So, what we're thinking about from a phishing perspective is if you do click on that link, minimizing the damage that is done. Implementing network segmentation or just installing the bare necessities for kind of advanced protection is really good. So just think about general system hardening tips. All of those are going to help mitigate the attack after an attack. I can't recommend two-factor or multi-factor authentication enough. This is one of those things that really increases the security of systems so significantly, and really doesn't affect your day-to-day too much at all. So it can stop a lot of credential theft attacks, or notify you if your credentials have been stolen. So we use Duo and a number of other two-factor auth style platforms. So the way this works is you type in your username and password, and then even though that username and password is correct, you still have to prove that you have control over one or more of your devices. So I get a notification on my phone or my watch to verify that I am the person who initiated the login. This is really critical. There's been a couple of times where I've had customers ask us for support because one of their higher up folks, their CEO or CFO or CTO, has fallen victim to a phishing attack and their credentials have been stolen. And then once their credentials are stolen, the attackers use those credentials to log in to their email system, and then they use that as a home base to send more phishing attacks to everyone internal to the company. Now, the reason why this is so powerful is that it's coming from the CFO. So if the CFO says, "Hey, send me your social security number or some other internal financial information," you might be likely to do it. So it's really important to kind of protect your accounts with multi-factor authentication. Yubico makes these nice little keys that plug into your laptop that kind of force you to add another token of authentication. Adaptive authentication is really nice. Adaptive authentication essentially looks at the quality of the request to verify whether or not this is an okay request to happen. So you can imagine something along the lines of you log in from, I live in Seattle, I log in from Seattle, and then 2 hours later, I try to log in from New York City or from China. It might flag that and say this is a unlikely request to be valid. And then it might force me to do more verification, like extra questions or multi-factor authentication. There are a lot of email client settings that you can use to help these kinds of things. One that is just helpful for me, I have this setting in the mail client that says, anytime I'm sending email from my account to anybody that's outside of security innovation, I want it to show up red. So you can see here that that Joe at whoisjoe.net email address shows up red, and that just helps me to notify them, hey, I'm probably not talking to the person that I think I am. And I can also do the same thing on the way in, so that if somebody says, oh, this is Ed Adams, our CEO, but it's coming from a Gmail address, I can quickly kind of identify that. There are a number of email server settings and guidelines that you can follow to help this. I'm sure many of you have played around with these settings yourselves or seen them. But first off, you can always auto-tag emails from outside your organization with a warning message to say, hey, this is originated from outside of our organization. It's probably untrustworthy. You can look if the email address looks suspicious. So yeah, don't click on something that doesn't map to my standard email address. And then think of how they refer to themselves. So I always call myself Joe. So if I finish my email with Joseph, that would be kind of a weird way of me to close an email from myself. So I probably wouldn't say that. Check for misspellings and grammar mistakes, and then do a gut check. I always think that we look for so many things like, okay, well, here are the 4 steps to verifying this is a real email. But really just do a gut check. Is this reasonable? Has the CEO ever asked you for your social security number before? Is that a reasonable thing for them to do? Did they, out of the blue, did they just start asking for a lot of sensitive information very quickly? That seems a little unreasonable. If you have a question, just double check. It doesn't take any time to double check in another channel, right? So don't respond to the email and say, hey, is this a valid request? Obviously, the attacker will say yes, but instead go the other direction and say, I'm going to just call the CEO and say, hey, I got this weird email from you. Is this true? And he'll say, oh, yeah, that's true. I need you to send $10,000 to the Fish and Chips Credit Union. That's what we do. And you go, oh, okay, that seems really, really fishy to me, but I guess if you say it's true, then I'll do it. But otherwise, I'll probably say, no, that's totally not a real email. You can certainly also configure web browsers and train users for best practices so that you have different warnings or block reported attack sites or web forgeries. Those are all really good things to do. So you need to set the right settings and then also train your users as well as possible. Okay, so let's get into some policies and incident response. Because these are the kinds of things that I think you guys as decision makers and policy setters will really need to think about. Now, policies can certainly be either written or technical procedures. So you could have a written policy that says stuff like how you deal with social media while at work, or how you allow people to access certain sites while at work or on their certain computers. And then you can also have technical requirements. So you can actually restrict access to certain sites while at work or from a work computer. Really depends on your own culture and how you want to deal with those things. I think that training is really important. Security awareness training for your state-of-the-art attacks is just hugely valuable, hugely important. It's so important because, like I said, these attacks are always evolving, and it's important to make sure that people are aware of the current attack state. I think that it's good to do them more than annually, and then also test for proficiency. So do some phishing training, do some phishing testing, and make sure that those people are getting the value that they need. And then also, as awareness, just keep people up to date on the latest phishing techniques. From an incident response plan perspective, if, like I said, 4% of the people are going to click on a phishing email. So, you think of your company, you've got 100 people in your company, you've got 4 people that are going to click through, or if you've got 1,000 people, you've got 40 people that are going to click through. So how are you going to detect who clicked on those links, or analyze where those phishing attacks came from? How are you going to contain the damage once they have clicked through? How are you going to eradicate future incidents? And then how are you going to recover if you did have some malware attack happen? How are you going to recover from that breach? And then once the incident is over, it's important to do some kind of root cause analysis, post-incident handling. What was compromised? How was that compromised? What were the lessons learned? Are there any policy changes or configuration changes? Any technical changes that need to occur? How are you going to make sure that doesn't happen again? And then one of the things I really like to do is what I call, or what's called tabletop exercises. I call this kind of like a D&D for IT companies, right? So you're probably all familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a tabletop game where you go on a quest with all kinds of different crazy characters, and it kind of like imagines through a whole scenario. Now, you do that same kind of thing, but for attacker vulnerability scenarios. And the reason why this is so important is that it fleshes out or fleshes out the communication policies and routes that you're going to take if something happens, something bad happens. So just as an example, imagine tomorrow you find out that a hacker has breached your network, and they wrote a blog post about it on the internet, and it's gone viral, right? Like you found out that, oh my goodness, this hacker has published this blog post. They've told the world about it. How are we going to handle that? Okay, so there's your scenario. And internally, you're going to have to make some phone calls. You might have to make phone calls to your IT department, your technical people. You might have to talk to your convenience stores. You might have to talk to your marketing team, your lawyers, your communication department. Everyone might need to be notified. And you don't want the very first communication to your marketing, communications, and lawyers to be that you're having this, you had a major data breach, right? Because that's just going to, they're going to have all kinds of weird questions about what's going on and how, and there's going to be a lot of context that you need to build up. And so having these tabletop exercises kind of gives you that opportunity to run through the process, the scenario for the first time, and just to see how it goes. And then you can kind of go back and say, hey, did communications flow as expected? Did we have any weird hiccups where we didn't know who to talk to? Those kinds of things. Were there any surprises? And then you can address those later. So final thoughts, staff is a great defense. You can kind of treat them like other IT defenses. You can think of them as little sensors all around your network, listening for phishing attacks, notifying the rest of the group when they've seen a phishing attack or what a phishing attack might look like. They can act like firewalls. They can block attacks because they've detected the incoming threat. They can raise their alarms. They do need configuration and patching, I call education and reminders, right? You need to be able to educate them, update their own virus detection through education and updates. Get staff involved in the solution. Have them craft emails and test top ones throughout your organization. Reward users for reporting phishing attempts, even if they were successful. Offer prizes, recognition, and throughout. And then stay informed. You need to stay up on whatever the latest phishing attacks are, and then maintain your knowledge on these vulnerabilities and attacker techniques. And so that's really the top level stuff. I hope that you found this really helpful. I'm right up against the hour, so I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I'm more than happy to take them if you have any questions. If not, you'll get a set of these slides soon, and I'm more than happy to take emails. If you want to write my email address down, gabeBecerrico@securityinnovation.com. I'm happy to respond after the call.
Joe, thank you very much. That was great information, and I had a whole bunch of questions for you, but you answered them all. And I think that's indicative of the whole webinar for everybody else as well, because there really haven't been any questions per se that you didn't answer. So if anybody does have any additional questions, please type them in the GoToWebinar question panel, and we'll be happy to answer them. And the only other thing that I was just thinking about when you were talking about, multi-factor authentication, is for me personally, I actually have it on my personal email accounts as well, and I find that very reassuring because, with all of the data breaches of some of the popular email servers, there's every once in a while I get something popped up that says, "Hey, are you trying to log in?" No, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So, So, you know, so don't forget to also consider your personal life as well.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, password, password reuse and two-factor authentication is a whole webinar in and of itself. But if there's one thing that I could recommend is, certainly get a password vault. Make sure that you're not reusing passwords across multiple places, and anywhere you can enable two-factor or multi-factor authentication, do that. Attackers will a lot of times breach one server, download thousands of valid emails and passwords, and then the first thing that they do is they use those emails and passwords on every site that they can find. So every bank, every social site, everything, and those are valid credentials. So if you don't have two-factor auth installed on those places, or you've reused passwords, it's a very quick way of falling victim to that attack. So absolutely. I'm really happy to hear that you've got it on your personal email, and I would say enable it anywhere you can.
Joe, thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening. And if you do have any questions, please go to email us at info@conexxus.org, and then look for the survey link via email, and then there'll be a link for you to download the presentation. So thanks again, everybody. And thank you very much, Joe. Great information. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks so much.